Inventions that have changed the world.
It's time for USUN Report. Here's Tom Osborne.
These are the headlines making news this week. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is expected to fly into Singapore's Changi Airport on Sunday ahead of a high-stakes summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. Talks between the leaders on June 12th are expected to center on ending the North's nuclear weapons and missiles program in return for diplomatic and economic incentives. Austria's right-wing government plans to shut down 7 mosques and expel up to 40 imams in what is said was just the beginning of a push against Islamic ideology and foreign funding of religious groups. Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney on Friday welcomed a British plan for ensuring there are no customs checks along with the Irish border when Britain leaves the European Union. Prime Minister Theresa May, who is struggling to contain divisions in her cabinet over Brexit, proposed on Thursday that she would keep Britain tied to the EU's customs union for up to an extra year after an almost 2-year transition period if there were any delay in implementing a divorce deal. The U.S. State Department on Friday issued an expanded health alert on a strange weaponization of sound throughout China amid reports some U.S. diplomats based in the country had experienced a mysterious malady that resembles a brain injury and has already affected U.S. personnel in Cuba. Which leads us to our story of the week on USUN Report, Inventions that have changed the world. Here is our resident political scientist and historian, Dr. David Kanervo, who will give us the backstory. David?
Thank you, Tom. Inventions are ideas brought into existence with the hope of improving human life. They range from the creation of pottery in 7900 BC, which gives us something to hold our water and food and flowers, the development of the wheel in 3500 BC, which revolutionized transportation, the creation of stone tools, which allowed us to build and discover more things, and the development of penicillin in 1928, which helped to reduce suffering and save lives, all the way to the internet, which today is considered a basic utility as much as water and electricity. Throughout history, there have been thousands of creations, some more significant than others, that have altered human life. The marvels of today, such as microwave ovens, cell phones, and flat-screen televisions, have resulted from the imagination, creativity, and research of those who lived earlier. Cameras, light bulbs, airplanes, and telephones, while sometimes attributed to one very smart inventor, were actually the result of years of thinking and experimentation by many people who could pass on their minor successes and failures for others to learn from. We owe much gratitude to the people who struggled in the past with their wonderful ideas and can look forward with anticipation to the unimaginable creations of the future. Ken?
Thank you, David. Let's begin with this exclusive interview Tom and I had with Catherine Saliba, the daughter of Douglas Ring. Who is Douglas Ring, you might ask? Well, he's credited by Bell Labs as the conceptual inventor of today's cell phone technology. We're very fortunate today to have Catherine Saliba with us on USUN Report. And Tom, you get the first question.
As a little girl, did you go into your father's study and ask a lot of questions? Or was he free about explaining his vital work to his children?
He would have been very free to give us advice and all kinds of things, but we did not ask a lot of questions, unfortunately. I wish now I had, but no.
Catherine, Ken McCaleb here. What about mealtime? Was he the kind of guy who would stop and take regular meals, or what did you have to do?
We had a formal dinner every single night at 5:30, routine. It was quite an experience. We had 4 courses. This is the way he liked it, and this is the way, so my mother did what he liked. And he served everybody. It was something we talk about often now, about how casual we are now about mealtime, but we were very formal as kids.
Was he an ex-military guy?
No. He was, during World War II, he was an engineer at Bell Labs, and so that he was needed here. Thank goodness he didn't have to go over. but he worked on radar for finding enemy ships and got an award, a Navy award for that. We were pretty proud of that. Only I didn't know that either until years and years later.
When was the first time you got to use a cell phone, or did you?
I honestly can't remember exactly, but I know the first cell phone was probably in the 80s. It was big and bulky, and I would have to run into building lobbies in order to hear. The second cell phone was my little flip phone, which I had until a couple of weeks ago when I got an iPhone.
Well, you know, I remember the bag phone. Do you remember that, Catherine? People would carry around something that looked almost about the size of a shoe shine box.
Yes. This is kind of a funny story, but my father had a rotary phone, dial phone, until the day he died. He wouldn't even get a touch-tone phone. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
We laugh about that. Someone who was so brilliant and had so many ideas in his head, he was not into technology for himself.
There's a rumor that some of his fellow engineers would come by and they would bring in grilled cheese sandwiches and they would all use the microwave to melt them. Is that true?
Oh, I don't really know about that. I know the microwave was the one thing he was very excited about. He worked on the microwave, and he finally did get a microwave himself, and he just went on and on and on about it. He loved that. So that was one technological thing he used.
Were you the second cell phone user in the world?
Am I the second cell phone user in the world? Well, in 1947, I was a little kid. He had written a memo at Bell Labs with the concept of the cellular phone, and that was presented to Bell Labs. That was presented to the FCC, and the FCC stymied it because there was not enough tech knowledge to proceed with making a cell phone. So it was stashed away in a drawer for decades until the 1960s, when they took it out and were able to use his concept to make an actual cell phone. But he was never recognized for that, and we never found out about it until after he had died. We knew nothing about this.
Literally, Catherine, did your father actually submit the patent for Bell Labs?
For the memo of the cell phone, I do not believe so. Bell Labs owned all the patents back then, so nobody had personal patents. And I found out later that some of the engineers fought that. My father never would have done that, never fought for a personal patent.
Back in 1947, how did this invention in that moment start changing the world? Or did it take all this time to get to your father's dream?
It took decades. In 1947, that memo was stashed away in a drawer, and it was found again in 1968 when it was pulled out, and the actual cell phone, physical cell phone, was actually made, because then they had enough technology to use his concept. But his concept was the original idea.
Was your father's work top secret, and did the powers that be know about it? For example, the present administration at the time, President Truman, very doubtful, I suspect, or perhaps not.
No, I don't think it was top secret at all. I think all the engineers were working on a lot of these things all together. They worked as a group. My father just did not talk about it. He just did his work. He would sit in a scruffy, easy chair every evening with a pad of paper, a pencil, and a slide rule, and write numbers and formulas and diagrams and papers and papers and papers stacked up by his chair. And we didn't know what he was doing, but that's what he was doing. He was conceiving of these fabulous ideas.
Sometimes we love it. It saves lives. Sometimes we hate it. But the cell phone is almost another appendage. It's been a pleasure to talk to Catherine Saliba, the daughter of Douglas Ring, who invented the cell phone. Not only the cell phone, but the preliminary work on building the network we use worldwide. Thank you for a very interesting piece of history and for joining us on USUN Report.
I always love talking about my dad, and I've been trying to get him some recognition about this after I found out about it years after he died. And it's been wonderful talking with all of you and honoring my dad. Thank you for giving me this chance.
Amazing interview, right, guys?
Absolutely. Beautiful. Very interesting. It's hard to believe that one mind can do all that.
It was a wonderful interview and shows something about time involved in today's modern inventions.
You're listening to USUN Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canervo, and Ken McCaleb, and we'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back to USUN Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canervo, and Ken McCaleb. Let's go back in time for this next invention, say the 1980s, or maybe a little further. Welcome to the world of sampling, courtesy of Vox.com. That's Vox.com.
Listen to this sound. You hear that? It's a sound effect called an orchestra hit. Bruno Mars, he's the king of nostalgia, and he used that effect in Finesse to take you back to the 80s. That's right. Take a listen to any pop, dance, or hip-hop song in the 80s or 90s, and you're gonna hear a version of it. I never knew when I was walking the line. There are all types of orchestral hits. But the original one, this one here, isn't from a few decades ago. In fact, it was first played in 1910 at the Paris Opera.
We can thankfully hear the greatest composer of our time, Stravinsky.
This is the famed 20th century Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. He's about 80 years old here, but when he first composed the Firebird Suite, he was 28 years old.
And during his adult life, the world changed dramatically 2 or 3 times.
That's Robert Fink. He wrote a history of that sound you just heard.
I'm Peter Vogel. I developed the first commercial sampling synthesizer, which was the Fairlight CMI, back in about 1975.
This is the Fairlight CMI. To put it simply, it's one of the most influential musical innovations of the past 100 years. It was one of the very first digital synthesizers, a digital audio workstation, and the first digital sampler all in one.
With the aid of computers, you could create the music that you had in your head a lot more easily than if you had to sit down and learn to play instruments from scratch. It was really a lazy shortcut.
What really made the Fairlight a game changer, though, was the digital sampler. You could hook up a microphone to the Fairlight, record any second of sound, and then play it at any pitch on the keyboard.
Tatiana Ali. Tatiana Ali. Do it in low.
When you hear that orchestra hit, you're hearing something which is very much about the middle 1980s. It's actually something that was first thought of by a guy in 1909. It's like a moment where a whole bunch of times are sewn together. It is kind of timeless.
Ironically, the orchestra hit was a complete accident, which was sampled by me. I just happened to have a vinyl recording of the Stravinsky Firebird Suite nearby when I was messing around. That orchestra hit, which I think was right at the beginning of one of the tracks.
Tom Osborne, can you explain to our audience some of the developments that have taken place in our industry, both entertainment, electronic news gathering, especially things like sampling? Is it music to your ears?
Well, sampling to me has become sort of a technical contest. And so what I hear is really fantastic music. You have to admit the beat and everything is tremendous, but it's also very technical and you can't well, I guess you end up missing Bing Crosby singing "I Dream of Christmas," something like that, somebody that's real. But it does sound rather mechanical to me, and it throws a lot of virtuosos under the bus. Ken?
Dr. Canervo, what are your thoughts on the personal computer and how it's being integrated into modern music today?
Well, Ken, I must admit that I'm not a huge fan of modern music. The electronic means by which music is generated today is not something that I find particularly melodious to my ears. Even some of the contemporary music, which is done straightly or created straightly through regular musical instruments is not something that I necessarily like. One of the reasons is because of the new harmonics which are used in contemporary music is not so beautiful to my ears. I guess in that sense I'm very much a throwback. But I know that computers are, as I hope we'll talk about later, fantastic machines which can do so many, many things. And of course, music is just one of those areas that we've been able to move into with the use of computers. Ken?
Well, the personal computer was invented in the 70s, and they greatly expanded human capabilities. While the smartphone is more powerful, and one of the earliest PCs was introduced in 1974. Well, today, a lot of artists are composing music on their telephones, and they're doing it in places like on the bus and anywhere. So I suppose that this is a good thing, but I know that people, a guest that we've had on in the past, gentleman, Lou Stallman, is a Grammy-nominated songwriter. He feels as though the music industry has betrayed him. Tom, would you care to comment?
Well, knowing people like Lou and his art, I can understand how he feels because, as I said earlier, he was playing with his talent, and it wasn't so much added to by technical innovation that it could be lost in the shuffle. So to me, these new innovations and selections are more of a technical beat than they are a song that has been composed and thought about a great deal. Ken?
You know, in our first segment, we talked a little bit about the microwave. And I know that in our industry, we use microwave for broadcasting back to the studio. But most people use a microwave for cooking food. And in 1945, Raytheon's Percy Spencer stood in front of a magnetron, the power tube of radar, and he feels a candy bar melt in his pocket. He's intrigued, and when he places popcorn kernels in front of the magnetron, the kernels explode all over the lab. 10 years later, Spencer patents a radar range that cooks with high-frequency radio waves that same year. And the Tappan Stove Company introduces the first homemade microwave model. Dr. Canerva, was that something that you bought back in that day?
I think the first microwave in my home, my parents' home, was probably back in the 1990s. So we were not an early adopter of that kind of innovation, partly because we weren't sure what to make of it. My mother had her normal ways of cooking, and so wasn't quite sure how she would use it and what she would do with it, and was not so quick to adopt that kind of innovation. So I was not an early one, but as someone who does much of the cooking around the home today, I find it a very useful invention. Ken?
Tom Osborne, tell me some of the other American inventions that you researched for the show.
Well, it's very interesting. As a matter of fact, I just want to add one more to the microwave. The first food that was cooked in it, I don't know his name, but it was a grilled cheese sandwich. Now, everywhere you look, there's some opinion writer that's predicting the imminent decline of the United States and the end of the American century, and most innovations are going to take place in other parts of the world. But Thomas Friedman and Michael Mandelbaum have recently come out with a book that is entitled That Used to Be Us, and it paints a picture of an economically emergent China that's catching up to us on every front. And innovations and inventions here are quite, we're trying to keep up with the world now, where at one point we really didn't have to try. One of the first major inventions in the United States was by George Washington Gale Ferris, who debuted the first Ferris wheel as the landmark of the Chicago World Fair on June 21st, 1931. And most likely the top of our favorites is the chocolate chip cookie. Same situation that you had described was by accident. And so we've had a lot of interesting, maybe not critical inventions, but purely U.S. inventions that make us feel good. Ken?
You're listening to USUN Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canerva, and Ken McCaleb. And we're up against a hard break, but we will be back right after these messages, so stay with us.
Welcome back to USUN Report. I'm David Canervo, along with Ken McCaleb and Tom Osborne, and we're talking about inventions that have changed the world. Ken?
Thank you, David. Here's an audio clip from the top trending on 5 new inventions that are still under development.
The self-driving Google car. The Google self-driving car is a project by Google that involves developing technology for autonomous cars. As of right now, more than 33,000 people die each year in the United States from automobile crashes, and roughly 40% of fatal accidents are caused by alcohol, distraction, fatigue, and drugs. What could change those numbers? Taking a human off the wheel. Letting robots take the wheel would save more lives. Heat-generated electricity. Our bodies generate a significant amount of heat, and we're not making any good use of it. With recent technology, we can use our own body heat to generate electricity. Clothes that charge your phone may sound like a fantasy, but it's actually currently in development. One small piece of fabric could allow a person to charge a cell phone with their body heat. Also, 16-year-old Anne Mokosinski invented a hand heat-generated flashlight, allowing people who don't have electricity to use their own body heat for light. Just imagine how much this technology could benefit all of us. Hyperloop. Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, has another transportation system in mind, this one train-based. Hyperloop is a speculative project that envisions train-like vehicles traveling through tubes with minimal friction, enabling speeds of more than 600 miles per hour. That's fast enough to travel from San Francisco to LA in 35 minutes. Just imagine how much time this would save. Teeth-fixing chewing gum. Nearly 4 billion people around the world suffer from untreated oral diseases, including cavities and gingivitis. The solution? Sweet Bites, a chewing gum that is enhanced with xylitol to clean teeth and prevent disease. Not only could this invention help everyone around the world make strides in oral health, but its creators also hope to have an entrepreneurial women sell it in poor communities, helping spur economic development. Reusing shower water. Showers waste a tremendous amount of water and require a huge amount of energy every year. 1.2 trillion gallons of water are used to shower in the US alone. The Orbsius shower promises to reduce water use by a whopping 90% and energy use by 80%. The shower recycles shower water by pumping it through a filter in a closed-loop system, and the clean water that comes out of the filter only needs to be reheated minimally. If this device was used on a large scale, it could result in a dramatic water and energy savings.
David, can you comment on Google's self-driving cars, Hyperloop, Elon Musk, and perhaps Sir Richard Branson in their prowess for new inventions?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I must confess that of those 5 items that were mentioned on the lead-in, that the self-driving cars from Google and other companies that are looking at it as well, and the Hyperloop are 2 oncoming inventions which really do excite me a great deal. The self-driving car concept is one which I think can lead to a much more safer transportation system on ground. The self-driving cars are wonderful because they can help to reduce the terrific number of traffic accidents and fatalities that we have now. People do drive under the influence, as the little clip suggested, and so I think self-driving cars are one way of getting around that problem. I must confess, while I don't have a newer car, I'm excited about the kind of intermediate technology that has developed thus far, the automatic braking, the automatic centering of cars between lines, those sorts of things with the backup cameras, and all of that really, I think, are real advances for automobiles that I'm excited to try to use one day. The Hyperloop is another example of inventions that really are appealing to me. I'm not a big flyer. I just like all the hubbub that goes on at the airports and the security screening. I wish we had fast trains in this country, as we do in Europe and Japan. But given the fact that we don't have much of that available, the Hyperloop sounds like a wonderful idea for trying to provide the best of both worlds, in the sense that it's very fast travel, it's in a closed tube, It appears to be safe because it might be underground and thereby avoid some of the crashes that occur between trains and vehicles. My understanding is that there currently is an experimental tunnel being built under Los Angeles for the trials of the Hyperloop in that area. So I think we've got some wonderful inventions I hope that we'll see in my lifetime. Ken?
Tom Osborne, how do you feel about self-driving cars and trucks that'll be on the interstate?
Well, I'm fine as far as I'm concerned, but I'm just concerned about the other guy. I don't know whether he has the same technical parts that I do. And let's face it, it costs a lot of money to build these cars, and some people will probably try to cut corners. You never know. Maybe they think they can make it work without all the parts. But makes me nervous, although I think it's probably an amazing invention that will save thousands and thousands of lives, no doubt. Ken?
Well, just to review, in 1955, we got our TV remote controls, and that was invented by Zenith's Eugene Poley. Basically, it was essentially a flashlight, and you would point it at the television, and it would change your channel or turn it on or off. In 57, the birth control pill was designed, and it's been controversial ever since. In 1958, the jet airliner, the Boeing 707, debuts as the world's first successful commercial jet. In 61, we had cordless tools. And also in 61, we had the industrial robot, which would be General Motors' assembly line, and that was based in New Jersey, the first one. In 62, communications satellite, and Telestar was launched as the first active communications satellite, which of course affects our industry. And in 62, we also had LEDs, light-emitting diodes, by General Electric. And in 64, we had unmanned aerial vehicles. I wasn't aware that the unmanned aerial vehicle came out that early. Dr. Canerva, were you?
No, I was not, though I guess it doesn't surprise me. We have model planes, small planes that people have flown from the ground. Originally, of course, with wires, but secondly, by radio control. And so it doesn't surprise me, I suppose, that that was developed at that time using radio technology.
Apparently, it was in the Vietnam War, and it was deployed, I think, on 34,000 surveillance missions. Tom Osborne, do you have any more American inventions you want to talk to us about?
Well, of course, we should never forget the electronic hearing aid. That was invented in 1902 by Miller Reese Hutchinson, an inventor from Alabama. And we shouldn't forget the defibrillator, which was delivering a large dose of electrical energy to a heart affected with arrhythmia, ventricular fibrillation, and tachycardia. It's first used on humans by Dr. Claude Beck. Ken?
Well, I know in 62 they introduced video games, and it was MIT's programmers wrote something called Space War. 43 years later, 89% of school-age kids now own video games. And in 1955, I was one at that time, polio vaccine. It was the year Jonas Salk finds a way to prevent polio. So in 57, we had the three-point seatbelt, which is currently still in use today. 1964, the music synthesizer. Now, I'm jumping ahead, and I'm talking about Robert Moog. And I still have a Moog synthesizer, and they're very collectible now. You're listening to USUN Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canerva, and Ken McCaleb. And today we're talking about inventions that have changed the world. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to USUN Report. I'm Tom Osborne with Ken McCaleb, Dr. David Canerva. We're talking about inventions that have changed the world. Ken?
Thanks, Tom. Let's not forget about tiny inventions that have changed the world as well. This next clip is from South Africa, Eyewitness News.
What do paper clips, microchips, and the toothbrush have in common? They are all tiny inventions that made a titanic impact on our modern lives. And now these miniature marvels are being celebrated with a new exhibition at the Cape Town Science Centre.
We often just look at the big innovations, the big inventions, but there are lots of tiny little baby innovations or inventions that have been made over time that actually have changed our lives or made our lives more convenient. Each one has a fascinating history. One that stems from nature is Velcro. That was somebody who noticed a cockle and burr on their sock.
One of my other favorites that I have is the adhesive plaster, which was created by Mr. Dickens, Earl Dickens, and he was an engineer and an inventor, and what he did is his wife was an accident prone, so in the kitchen she always used to cut herself and hurt her fingers, so he invented the adhesive plaster that she would be able to apply on herself.
We've displayed the items in the miniature theme. We've put them under miniature Perspex bubbles, and we've given each person a magnifying glass which they can hone in onto the signage. And it just showcases the wonderful process of innovation.
One of the small inventions that comes to mind for me is in 1969, the smoke detector. Randolph Smith and Kenneth House patented a battery-powered smoke detector for home use. And later models relied on perhaps the cheapest nuclear technology you can own. You can own a chunk of Americium-241. The element's radioactive particles generate a small electric current, and if smoke enters the chamber, it disrupts the current, triggering an alarm. Now, Tom Osborne, can you think of any tiny inventions we should feature?
Well, I'm thinking of those little robots that they put in your bloodstream that actually are machines, and they go through your bloodstream and they actually either deliver medications at a certain level, and they maintain their presence in your system and maintain your basic stability. Ken?
Well, Tom Osborne, isn't aspirin one of those tiny inventions that helps people that have heart issues?
Aspirin is the most common small invention you could think of. You're absolutely right. And everyone has at least one or two a day in these days of headaches. Ken?
And Dr. Canervo, the CCD, it's called the Charge Coupled Device, came out in 1969, Bell Labs. And George Smith and William Boyle invented a charge coupling device that can measure light arriving at the rate of just 1 photon per minute. Dr. Canervo, you must have a camera that's digital at this point. I know the whole world has gone digital.
Yes, absolutely. I finally broke over to a digital camera just a few years ago. And the coupling device is a wonderful invention. It allows not only cameras, but I would think other kinds of light-sensitive devices, such as security systems, for example, lights that come on as dusk falls, those sorts of things which, because of their light sensitivity, come on and work automatically, and those are wonderful devices. Ken?
Well, Tom Osborne, it's probably that time again for rapid fire, and I know that you've been doing some research on disastrous inventions where things went wrong. Would you care to share that with us now?
Oh, I would love to, yes. Let's take the top 10, or at least a few of the top 10. First of all, there's the detachable dog sack. Now, if you're a man who's enjoying his best friend but hate the hair he leaves behind, then the detachable dog sack is for you. Now your pet can ride outside the car in a pouch attached with rubber padded hooks to the open window of your vehicle. This is serious, because let's face it, who needs safety when you have a sack? The other invention we won't say too much about, but it's called the cat wig. It's pretty difficult to decorate a cat, but with a kitty, maybe. And then there's iPhone fingers, ranging from small to extra large. One Austrian company offers only the best in latex digital protection to keep your iPhone smudge-free. And this is somewhat practical, actually, the pedal-powered wheelchair. But I don't see how you could use it if you need a wheelchair. It's for those people who can't stand, but they can still pedal. Okay, that one will pass. Then we have the inflatable dartboard. Now, this takes the case. Completely collapsible, the inflatable dartboard could amazingly be stuffed into a space the size of a small cup. It's great for use in tight spaces and for those looking for a quick single-player, single-hit game. There's no need to worry, though. It comes complete with a puncture repair kit in case anything should go wrong. And then we have the anti-eating face mask. It's exactly what it sounds like. Essentially a metal cage that attaches to your face to prevent those of us lacking any self-control from ingesting solid foods. The anti-eating face mask is pretty straightforward, but there must be easier ways of losing that extra winter weight. And my final two are Number 1, the prankster fire alarm trap, coming straight out of the February 1938 issue of Modern Mechanics magazine, that's spelled with an X. The prankster-proof fire alarm traps the hand of any offender in a metal handcuff until the fire brigade arrives to release him. Well, that's perfect for fake fires, but in the event of a real blaze, you're taking on one for the team on that one. And then there's one more, the helicopter ejection seat, which I think speaks for itself. Vertical propulsion and spinning overhead propellers, probably not the best method to escape death, and yet the currently operating Kamov Ka-50 Russian attack helicopter does have just that. It's secret. Before the pilot ejects, explosive charges blow off all 6 twin rotor blades so he can soar through the airspace without being decapitated. Theoretically, at least. And those are my favorites. Ken?
Wow. I wonder if any of those have been tested properly.
I think the helicopter ejection seat, yeah.
All right. On a serious note, I'd like to talk to you guys about a life-saving device that can seal a wound in under a minute. It's an Oregon startup, RevMedX. It's a new device called the XStat-30, and it's a syringe filled with tiny biocompatible sponges, which can be injected into a deep wound to absorb blood and seal it in less than a minute. Now, while it's been used on the battlefield since April 2014, it was only recently approved by the FDA for civilian use. The Internet on a microchip. The WiderNet project, based in the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, developed an eGranary pocket library, a microchip that taps into the power of smartphones, laptops, and tablets to deliver online information and educational resources. Dr. Canerva, is that something that appeals to you?
Well, it does. The microprocessors that have been created over the last 20 to 30 years are really interesting to me because they have allowed us through miniaturization to do so many great things, from having what is essentially a computer in a car to the powerful cell phones that we have, and the ability to extend the cell phone into perhaps a library type system. I think is a great idea, and I would hope that through miniaturization that we can have more inventions of a similar use. Ken?
Well, Doctor, as a follow-up, there's a revolutionary material that's being used to absorb large oil spills. The researchers at Deakin University in Australia, along with scientists at Drexel University in Philadelphia and Missouri University, developed a type of nanosheet that can clean up oil spills like a sponge. And each nanosheet is made up of flakes that are only several nanometers, 1/1,000,000th of a meter, thick, with tiny holes which can grow to the size of 5.5 tennis courts. The pores on the nanosheets provide the surface area to absorb oil and organic solvents up to 33 times its own weight. That's a great way of cleaning up the environment, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It seems to me that despite all the hand-wringing that we have done about the environment, we are at the same time making great strides about how we can control our own messes, so to speak, and fix the environment, keep it as clean as possible, or cleaner certainly than it has been over the last several years. So I have a lot of hope in that kind of future technology. Ken?
You're listening to USUN Report with Tom Osborne, Dr. David Canerva, and Ken McCaleb. And when we come back, we're going to try and summarize today's show about inventions that have changed the world. So stay with us. Welcome back to USUN Report. And we're in our summary section of the show. We asked Mary Saliba to give us a conclusion as to the new inventions that are changing the world. Mary?
Thanks, Ken. I wonder if every generation feels that, aside from a cure for cancer, everything we need has been invented, and anything else is scary. New inventions range from unnecessarily frivolous to amazing, to the exact thing that will ruin this generation and the entire world forevermore. When that new TV or blender arrives after your dad stops waiting for them to perfect it, you go through the 4 stages of invention: excitement, frustration, nostalgia, need. And things we grew up without are things we don't think anyone else should rely on. When my mom was talking with us about Douglas Ring's work on the cell phone, I was reminded of a time in the 60s. My grandfather reached up to the top of his mantle to show us his retirement gift, one of the first solid-state electronic calculators. It was magical, mysterious, and absolutely not to be touched. By junior high, calculators were common, but of course not allowed in school. Now I find myself competitive Facebooking with other self-righteous calculator-free elders who had to tell the cashier what change to give, because these kids were ruined and we weren't. Last summer we asked for directions in a gas station. The kid asked, "Don't you have a GPS?" "I don't know what I'd do if I forgot my GPS." We asked him to show us on the map where to go, but he didn't know how to read a map. We looked so dismayed he assured us he aspired to learn one day. But at least he can tell time on a real clock. But we all come to rely on the new gadgets of our era and don't know what we did without them. In newsrooms only 30 years ago, we relied on clip files and the library, slow and incomplete to say the least. The internet has both freed us and enslaved us in immeasurable ways. We can't return to that simple life before all this. Even if we could, we'd find it wasn't simple at all. When we fear the technology of the future, it's with the knowledge of the present. We must remember that the future, with all its potential, will also bring us those visionaries who will imagine the tools we will need when we get there. This has been Mary Saliba for US-UN Report. Ken?
Thanks, Mary. Well, Dr. Canervo, I'm sure you have some final thoughts on the inventions that we've spoken about today.
Well, I do, Ken. I'm someone who tends to be very excited about technology. I think some of the things that we have seen over the last 30, 40, 50 years that have appeared, as we've talked about with microwaves, telephones, cell phones, and so on, have been wonderful inventions. The hope I have for the future is that maybe we'll focus on some other aspects of invention, and one that I hope sees a lot of growth is health and medicine. I know that there are lots of experimentations being done, a lot of research being done in regard to cancer. I hope that through some of the new technologies that we have discovered, that the use of perhaps natural chemicals and other things, that we're able to make some real strides in cancer research. And I also hope that we can tackle some of the other diseases which are very difficult to deal with, one of which is ALS. I've had friends who have had it, or have friends who have it, and it's a terrible disease. So I hope that through creative activity of people in medicine and field, that we can make some headway, serious headway soon in dealing with those kinds of diseases. Ken?
Well, Tom Osborne, I really enjoyed your rapid fire section on the last segment. But as always, you have final say.
Well, thank you, Ken and David. Well, I have to throw in one risk-taker inventor. His name was Franz Reichelt, and he's known as the Flying Tailor. He's credited with inventing the coat parachute. And to prove his coat parachute worked, he conned the keepers of the Eiffel Tower to let him demonstrate. So on February 4th, 1912, Franz held a major press venue, and lots of witnesses showed up. He leaped for the first deck, and gravity took over. The tragic inventor's death was captured on video and still lives on.
Dr. Canervo, your thoughts on this gentleman jumping off the Eiffel Tower in the parachute?
Despite the very bad outcome for him, it illustrates one of the issues regarding invention, and that is that experimentation is crucial, and we hope we learn from our mistakes. Ken?
Yes, indeed. Tom Osborne?
I'm afraid we've run out of time again. Thank you for joining us this week on US-UN Report on inventions that have changed the world. Join us next week for another US-UN Report with myself, Tom Osborne, our executive producer, Ken McCaleb, and Dr. David Canervo, our resident historian, and Mary Saliba, our editorialist. Thanks for listening.